Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest edition of The Pulse with BP. I'm your host, Billy Parvatam. Folks, I'm so excited today to be joined by Mr. Mike Bacsik, former big league pitcher from 2001 to 2007. He's a current radio host for 105.3 The Fan in the Texas area, in Dallas area. And he's also, if I may say so myself, a part of baseball history. Mike, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Billy. Thanks for having me.
Well, I want to start off with first, how have you been handling this pandemic? I mean, this is something that has impacted our lives both professionally and personally the last year. So how have you been handling this last year?
Well, hanging in there. Everything has kind of changed in the radio world. We don't go to the studio now. Now you can if you want, but we do have one of the hosts has a high-risk child at home, and so he can't. And so we've been working off of Zoom now for approximately a year, and we're pretty used to it now doing that. But also just going to restaurants or going to businesses, we can't do that still. And so that's really different, just because I've been doing radio since about 2008, really, after I was done. And you would do usually one, if not two shows a week, especially during football season, out at a restaurant or out at a business. And now that we don't do any of that, that has changed quite a bit.
This is such a treat for me to talk to you because I'm a big Nationals fan. So I remember when I was 10 years old, you pitching for the team back in 2007. I want to go back before that, though. You were drafted by the Indians in the 18th round out of high school in the 1996 MLB draft. You spent 6 years in the minor leagues and then finally made your debut on August 5th, 2001. I have to ask you, what do you remember about that day? It's got to be special, I'm sure.
Gosh, I remember, before that date, a few days before getting called up, being in Buffalo, New York in AAA and having a really good season that year and feeling like I had a chance to get called up. The Indians were a team at the time who were, fighting to win a division. They were a perennial winner since I was drafted. 95, they're in the World Series, 97, they're in the World Series and making the playoffs pretty consistently every year there. So when you get called up to a team like the Cleveland Indians in 01, it's very different than, let's just say, the Nationals in 07, where it's a developmental team. And the Indians were like, if you can't help us win or do something, we got to send you down and figure out somebody else who can maybe give us some quality innings. So it was really exciting to get called up, but also nervous because it was a bunch of veteran guys. And then when I did make my debut, it was against the Seattle Mariners, who I can't remember their record at the time, but it was insane. It was like 90-30, something crazy like that. And so getting to pitch against the best team in baseball in my debut on Sunday night on ESPN was really special, but probably the most nervous I've ever been pitching a baseball.
Well, Mike, I have to ask you, you know where I'm going. August 7th, 2007, you become part of baseball history when you gave up that home run to Barry Bonds' 756th home run. I have to ask you, what do you remember about that day? I mean, I remember reading in the morning, you're going out in the town around San Francisco, and you had a chance to talk to your dad, who was also a former big leaguer, and he kind of challenged you to challenge Barry Bonds. So I have to imagine that day really stands out to you in your career.
It does. That was one of those days that for a regular season game, and the night before, John Lannon had pitched, I believe it was a 3-game series. It might have been 4, but I know that it was at least a 3-game series. It had a playoff World Series feel to it, even though we were out of it. And I don't think San Francisco was a great team that year either, but it definitely, all the media from around the world was there, sellout, cameras going nuts, great environment to pitch, great environment to play in for us, the Washington Nationals at the time. And I can remember when he would come up, Barry Bonds would come up. I'd had success against him before, earlier in my career. In 2002, I faced him when I was with the New York Mets. And I just wasn't able to locate the way that I wanted to locate in that game, especially to him. And I was purely a location pitcher because I threw the ball in the mid-80s, had a below-average breaking ball and a really good changeup. But, I mean, location was super key to me. And on that day, I struggled with my location. And so it was a game I'll never forget. Yet, Billy, I've never gone back and watched that game, the whole game. I've seen the highlight a zillion times, but I've never gone back and watched. It wasn't one of those games that I really care to go back and watch because I really didn't pitch well in that game.
Well, I'm curious, Joe. He hits the home run off you, and then you kind of have this whole celebration. I mean, what is that moment like when really, in essence, the whole stadium is kind of celebrating at your expense? And is it true? Because I read later that Felipe Lopez, the shortstop, came up to you and said, "We're going to win this game for you." And the Nationals did. People don't remember they actually won that game 8-6.
Yeah, Felipe Lopez and Dimitri Young were the best at consoling me in the moment. We were on the field for a little bit. Then I don't know how long it was, whether it was 2 minutes or 5 minutes. I don't, recall exactly how long, but we were on there going, well, what do we do here? Because after he hit the home run, I felt really bad. But then we didn't know what was going to happen, how long the celebration was going to take. And so the umpires told us, hey, you can go off the field now. And so all of the Nationals, including me, we went off the field and waited for kind of the celebration to be over with. But I can remember Felipe Lopez and Dimitri Young consoling me in the dugout. And you're right, Felipe did tell me, hey, don't worry, we're going to win this game. And when I gave up the home run, I can't remember if it tied it at 5 or it took a 5-4 lead for them. It was right around that score in the 5th inning. And we ended up winning the game. And it was one of those ones that I'll never forget. And we weren't a very good team in 2007, but we did have a bunch of good guys.
And you had a chance to interact with Barry Bonds after the game. I believe he gave you an autographed bat. So I have to imagine that's pretty special. After the game, the two of you guys who are linked together in history had a chance to interact.
Yeah, and about the 7th inning, I finished out the 5th inning. He got pulled after the 5th inning after hitting the home run, and I went over into their clubhouse in the 7th inning, and it was a really cool moment. Omar Vizquel and Dave Roberts were in the clubhouse at that moment, and those were two of my former teammates on the Indians. And then you had Willie Mays, who I got an autographed ball from, I believe, that series. Frank Robinson was there, who was the manager of the Nationals in 06, who was part of releasing me in 2006 from the Washington Nationals. But he was there, and I believe Willie McCovey was also in the clubhouse at that time too. So it was, Hall of Famers, in there, and just a moment where Barry Bonds ended up giving me the bat. And that was a really cool moment. I have a picture of that whoever took the photograph, the MLB photographer, gave me a photograph of that. And that's at my parents' house. And honestly, real quick, I thought maybe the bat had gotten stolen a few years ago. We had people working in our house on our bathroom, and they took a lot of my wife's gift cards from when she turned 40 years old. And I didn't think anything of it, but the card explosion that has happened now with how much sports cards have gone up, I was looking for cards of mine and I couldn't find them. And I looked for months and I realized, those were probably taken out of our house too. And then I thought, I think the bat was in my closet too, but luckily it was hidden behind some clothes and they didn't take the bat, but they did get some like Kobe Bryant rookies and Dirk Nowitzki rookies and some really cool cards of mine that I had. But luckily I do still have the bat, and now I'm getting it framed up as we speak.
Well, I was wondering, I mean, you guys are linked, you and Barry Bonds, in history. Have you ever interacted with him? Have you ever met him again after that moment?
No, I haven't. I talked to him on the phone a few days after. We were in Arizona playing the Diamondbacks, and we had a conversation for about an hour on the phone, and very cordial, very nice. But from that point, I've never spoken to him. What was really cool is my father got printed up 16 by 20 photographs of him hitting the home run, where you can see pretty much everybody on the field. You can't see Raphael Palmeiro and you can't see Dimitri Young in the picture, but everybody signed the photograph where we were at in the field. So all 9 players for the Nationals. And my dad gave me like 20 of them and sent them to the clubhouse. So everybody who was on the field got one. And then I kept 4 of them and sent all 4 to Barry Bonds. And he kept 2 of them and sent 2 of them back autographed. So my father has one and I have one where everybody has signed it at their position and Barry Bonds signed it.
That's awesome. And I thought you had one of the great quotes of all time, because your dad had actually pitched against Hank Aaron when he had 755 home runs. So I remember you saying if your dad had been gracious to give Hank Aaron a home run, you both would have given up 756.
Yeah. And then we would have that would really be cooler. Honestly, thinking about it right now, is if it wouldn't have broke the record, but tied the record. And the last home run that Hank Aaron ever hit was off my father. And then the tying one, the exact number would have been off of me. That would have been not as historic, right? But really historic for the Bacsik family that two guys that struggled to stay in the major leagues gave up the exact number of home run to two of the greatest home run hitters of all time.
I'm curious, as a guy who's linked to Barry Bonds, what's your take on the whole conversation with him in terms of the steroids, in terms of his Hall of Fame candidacy, in terms of the legitimacy of the home run record? I mean, what's kind of your take on that as someone who obviously has a firsthand seat at that whole experience?
Yeah, Billy, that's tough because, he did he cheated the game. He's not the only one that cheated the game. I mean, unfortunately, around my time, I'm guesstimating, I didn't ever see somebody take steroids. I never saw anybody, whether it was a pill or whether it was a shot, I never saw them do it. But you assume around 25% to 33% of the guys around that time, and before 07, by then we were getting tested. And if people were doing it then, they were able to do it and be able to pass a test. But, in the 90s and early 2000s, you were able to take it and never have to take a test. And I would say about his Hall of Fame candidacy, I would put him in. I would vote Roger Clemens also in. Those are arguably the greatest hitter of all time, arguably the greatest pitcher of all time, but they do have a mark on their record. And there's other guys locally here, Raphael Palmeiro, 3,000 hits, 500 home runs. I mean, it's almost impossible not to make the Hall of Fame with those two stats. And I would say there's guys in right now in the Hall of Fame that did steroids. They just didn't get caught doing them or, get on the list of doing them or have books written about what they did. And so because of that, I would put Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens and even like a Raphael Palmeiro in the Hall of Fame. It's tough because we know what they did. And I understand my former teammates that say they should never get in. I'm not arguing against them hard. I understand their point. But from my point of view, you'd almost have to not put anybody in the Hall of Fame who played from approximately 1990 to 2005, because how could you prove that they did or didn't? We're going off of hearsay, unless you had positive tests. Barry never had positive tests. We know through reading books that I've read, The Cream and the Clear, that he was taking steroids at some points during his career, kind of after the Sosa McGuire thing. Roger Clemens says he never did, but there's multiple people, so that, can confirm that he did. It's very tough, but I would say that I would put them in the Hall of Fame because there's other guys in the Hall of Fame that did them, but just weren't either as good on them or never got caught doing them.
That's definitely a good perspective to have. I was wondering, have you ever connected with Al Downing? I mean, he's the guy that gave up the home run to Hank Aaron. I feel like you two could really relate on many different levels. Have you guys ever connected?
I never have, and Al Downing, I was a guy who won 10 games in the major leagues. He won 100 plus games. He was a great pitcher. I mean, the one thing about Al Downing is he had a great major league career. And I know that Hank Aaron and Al Downing became friends. They might've been friends before, but they did some traveling things where they would sign autographs together and everything like that. With Barry Bonds, I think the tough thing about that is, Al Downing, I've never got to talk to, but for Barry Bonds is, he's liked by some people. Obviously, if you're a Giants fan or just a huge Barry Bonds fan, but a lot of the public who love baseball don't maybe want Barry Bonds at whatever it is, a show or a dinner type of function or anything like that. So I think it's tough in that. And I don't know if like Al Downing is like, look, I don't want to reach out, or I'm going to stay away from all of that somewhat controversy.
This is really great to talk to you because you're a former big leaguer. So I get to ask you questions that just a lot of fans don't have a chance to know behind the scenes. I was curious, what do you guys do in the bullpen? I mean, you were a relief guy. So during most games, when you're in the bullpen, I mean, what are you talking to the other guys about? What was your routine? Did you have something specific you would do every game, especially when it's a game you could pitch it?
Yeah, we would always, with the Washington Nationals, we would have to clap if something positive happened, if a guy reached base. And if you did clap, then you could get slapped in the back of the head or slapped in the forehead. Not super hard, but like, hey, you're not watching the game. You're not supporting the team, but just to keep us active in watching the game, but also having fun down there. And yeah, there's different situations, especially in spring training, where you can goof off a little bit more, especially if you're not pitching. So you keep yourself engaged in the game, but yet enjoying being with your friends in the bullpen. For me, I always had to be ready kind of innings 1 through 5. After the 5th inning, if it was a close game, I didn't just relax and go, I'm definitely not getting in, but I could kind of start to relax. And other guys that their roles were pitching the 6th through the 9th inning in very close games, especially if we were winning. I mean, I don't know if I ever got put into a game where it was a close game that we were winning after like the 6th inning. So you kind of have your moments. There's about 3 guys that are really engaged innings 1 through 5. And then there's about 4 or 5 guys that get really engaged in innings 6 through 9 because that's their role. So everybody's kind of together, but you know who you can kind of maybe mess with and who you can't mess with during certain situations in the game.
But like during the game, are you actually paying attention to the game 100%? Or are you talking about your families, your lives? I mean, what's kind of going on in those conversations?
Yeah, we have we'll have silly conversations that maybe, or, fun conversations that you might have with your friends if you love baseball and be like, hey, who do you think was better, Hank Aaron or Mickey Mantle or Willie Mays? Rank them. If you could only have one of their rookie cards, who would you have? Dimitri Young was such a huge card collector that we'd have some fun talk about baseball cards. Hey, did you watch whatever it was, if it was Lost or The Office or, I'm going back to the time when I played, of really, popular shows. What do you think? What do you think is going to happen next? Stuff like that. Yet that's why you get slapped in the forehead or the back of the head. If our guy did hit a double, in the gap and you're having a great conversation about The Office or something like that, and you didn't start clapping for your team because you weren't engaged at all in the game, somebody would say, hey, keep having your conversation, but you got to watch the game too.
How many of your former teammates, I mean, you played in the big leagues for 6 years. How many of your former teammates are you still really good friends with and or you at least keep in touch with from time to time?
I keep in touch with quite a few of them kind of through Facebook, not so much through phone calls. And then living in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, we have the biggest major league alumni in Dallas-Fort Worth in the country. So there are things where I'll get to talk to people that I didn't play with that I've become friends with. But I reached out to Dimitri Young just a couple of weeks ago. I was wanting to have him on my show, but he's doing great. He's in California. He's coaching high school baseball, super busy, he has a podcast. I didn't know how big of a wrestling fan he was when I was his friend, but he's a huge wrestling fan. So he has like a wrestling podcast. But, you just reach out here and there on Facebook. But life gets so busy. I have 3 kids and married and multiple jobs. I also get to have a great job where I get to do pre and post game show for the Texas Rangers. I would say on Fox Sports Southwest, but it's changing to Bally Sports. So I don't, I know it's different in, different places, but Fox Sports got bought out. So I think everything's changing to Bally Sports. So that's something we have to get used to there. But I talked to quite a few guys here and there through kind of Facebook, every once in a while, a phone call, but nobody super close with, just because probably some of my best buds, they don't live in Dallas-Fort Worth.
I was wondering, because you were also traded. I was looking this up. You were part of a big trade in 2001 when you and Roberto Alomar were traded to the Mets. For the fans who don't know, what are some of the behind the scenes of what it's like when you're traded? I mean, I guess you have to figure out on the fly how you're going to get to your new destination, where you're going to live. If you have a family, how that's going to work. How does that all happen when you're behind the scenes and you get traded?
Gosh, Billy, that's a good question. And I think it's changed so much since 01. I mean, there was no Facebook, no Twitter, no Instagram. So Mark Shapiro, who I believe is president of the Toronto Blue Jays now, and one of my former teammates, Ross Atkins, is their general manager. So when I got traded, it was I think it was during the winter meetings, because I remember, flipping on ESPN and they'd have kind of winter meeting stuff. And I was informed by Mark Shapiro before the media got a hold of it. I think now, talking to current players, I would say 4 out of 5 times the players find out through social media, through that, rather than through a general manager or a president calling you and telling you that you're getting traded. So I can remember that moment, and it goes around, a time in my life where it was tough. My grandmother had died, and then 2 days later, the Indians called me up at night. I can remember, being in our home and Mark Shapiro calling, and I just won Cleveland Indians minor league pitcher of the year. And so I thought, well, they might be inviting me up to Cleveland for the ceremonies or anything. He's like, hey, just wanted to tell you, we've traded you to the New York Mets. and, appreciate, this and that. How are you doing? I said, well, that's actually a really tough time in my life right now. And he said, I'm sorry to hear that. I do want to inform you, though, that you've been traded. We love you and everything you've done for us. The Mets are really excited to get you. And I believe Steve Phillips, I can't remember if it was Steve Phillips or Duquette, who called me up probably an hour or two later. It's kind of like Mark Shapiro said, I've called him. I let him know. Then the Mets called me up and said, hey, we're inviting you to big league spring training. You're on our 40-man roster. We're excited to have you. And that was how that trade went down. But Billy, I think it's really different on how things are now. And I think it's very tough for general managers and presidents and managers to get the word to the player before the media gets it.
You pitched for the Washington Nationals in 2007, sort of the early days of the team in those first few years. What do you remember about that experience working for the playing for the team rather? And then what was it like to watch from the distance a couple years ago when they won the World Series, led by your former teammate Ryan Zimmerman?
That was really awesome, Billy. That was, for me, you kind of went through the teams I played for, Indians, Mets, Rangers, and Nationals. And none of them have won since when I was there or since. And so the Washington Nationals were the first team that I played for to win the World Series. So that was really awesome. Now, that being said, I know that there's kind of a mark on these guys, but the Houston Astros, AJ Hinch is one of my better friends in the game of baseball. So he lost, and I get, like, there's a lot that goes on when you talk about the Houston Astros now and what they did and how they won their World Series in 2017. But I felt a little bit bad for him. I felt, with Dave Roberts, who I love to death, I was so happy he won the World Series this year. But for the Washington Nationals, it was so exciting to see that, because you know what I thought about? I thought about all the fans that went to RFK. And that wasn't the most beautiful stadium in the world. And I can remember what it smelled like when it was humid in July and August and it just rained. And you're just like, oh, how does this place smell like this right now? This shouldn't smell like this. And so I can just think of all the season ticket holders that went through all those seasons, the few seasons at RFK, the tough times at the new stadium early. And I know things got pretty good pretty quick after I left with Harper and Strasburg. But for all the fans that got a team in Washington that immediately bought season tickets, and then in 2019, they got to see their team, the little Washington Nationals that, isn't like a household team, win it all. And that was just so awesome, because being here, growing up a Texas Ranger fan, my dad playing for the Texas Rangers, and the Rangers had the heartbreak in 2011 where they were one pitch away twice in different innings from winning it, and just seeing the heartbreak on the fans here that still haven't won a championship, and just getting that just good feeling for all the national fans that they got to celebrate a championship. And hopefully they still have a really good team. They're just in a really tough division right now.
You mentioned your former teammate, Dave Roberts. People know him a lot now, the World Series champion manager for the Dodgers. You played with him. I was wondering, do you have a good Dave Roberts story you could share? That's clean, I guess.
Oh, yeah. And Dave Roberts, super clean, great Christian man. Off the top of my head, well, you know what? I can remember this. This is a great story, especially for Billy. I'm going to ask you a question. How big are you into the analytics of the game of baseball?
I think I'm really interested in it, especially how, it's kind of impacted the game. I mean, with Moneyball, I think that was really the first opportunity to really see, man, this is another way of thinking about the game.
Yeah, and a lot of the game now is played base to base, station to station. You're trying to hit extra base hits. Obviously, OPS is a huge number. Not that that's a huge analytic number. That's been around for a while, but it's kind of taken way over on batting average, right? Batting average is still a stat that is important, but not nearly as important as your OPS and stuff like that. Is Dave Roberts told me in 2001, we're in Buffalo, and he said, Mike, I'm only like a 220 hitter, but I try to get a base hit bunt every series. And sometimes he doesn't accomplish that goal. Sometimes he accomplishes it and gets 2 bunt base hits. And he goes, if I get down, he did the math on it. If I get 1 base hit bunt a series, so every 3 games, just get 1 base hit bunt, I become a 275 hitter. I'm a 220 hitter if I don't try to bunt or I'm not a good bunter. But if I can get one bunt hit a series, now all of a sudden as a prospect in the minor leagues, I look like a 280 hitter, and I'm really not. But it's my ability to bunt and get on first base, then try to be able to steal second base or steal third base. And so I know that's not like a super fun story, but I just find that so important in today's game that there are so many people that, you think, well, you have to hit doubles, you have to hit home runs. And here's Dave Roberts, who carved out a great career. And he was, like he said, he was a guy who really couldn't bat 225, but because he could bunt, he was over a 250 batter.
I'm curious because you're the son of a big leaguer. You played in the big leagues yourself. How fun is it for you to get to coach your kids now, playing baseball? And does that kind of impact you at all? The fact that you were used to playing the big leagues, or are you more just trying to approach it with, hey, let's have fun with the game and that kind of thing?
It's super fun. At times it can be super challenging. I'll use challenging as the word. But you know what's tough, Billy, at times, umpires in Little League are doing their best and they're giving their time and they're getting a few dollars to do it. But when sometimes they don't know the rules and you're trying to help them out and you're just like, hey, I get that he was running inside the baseline, but if the guy just chunks it 20 feet over the runner's head, that's not interference. That you have to either hit the runner or it has to affect the first baseman. And they're just like, no, you don't know what you're talking about. And then you're like, oh, so do I pull out the card and say, well, listen, I played 13 years of professional ball. My dad played in the major leagues for a while. Like, I'm telling you. So a lot of times that's always tough, Billy, is sometimes when you know more than a lot of the people there, but you just have to try to be cordial and back off and just let that game happen. But it's really fun. But there are times where you're just like, God, I wish I could help here or help the other team, like runners on first and second, and you're coaching first base for your team. And there's times where I want to tell the first baseman on the other team, hey, don't hold them on. There's no reason to hold them on. Like, I want to teach you not to hold them on because he can't steal second because there's a runner at second. But there most of the time, 90% of the time, especially if I don't know the other team at all or the coaches at all, I just don't say anything. But there's times where I really want to help the other team too.
So what made you, after your playing days were done, want to get into the media?
Well, after I gave up the home run and we were getting close to the end of the season, I liked sports talk radio. I actually interned at the end of the 05 season. I was with the Phillies that year in AAA the whole year. And I didn't get called up in September. And so I interned from September through December at a sports talk radio station here in Dallas, Fort Worth. And I enjoyed it. I liked it. They would put me on the air a little bit just because of playing in the major league some. And they thought I was pretty good at it. Then at the end of 07, I personally called up ESPN and asked if I could do the post-season stuff, like on Baseball Tonight and on ESPN News and stuff like that. And at the time, I think the show was called Cold Pizza. And they said, yeah, you can do it because you were the only person ever that has called us up personally. Usually it's an agent calling and usually there's money involved. And they're like, we've never had actually a current major leaguer call us up and say they want to do this. And so I ended up doing that, did pretty well at that. I look back on it now and doing this now for 10 years or so, see a lot of the things that I did that I know to do better now on working on camera. But it was one of those things where I was pretty good at it. And in fact, the Nationals, which was really tough for me, Billy, in 08, I'm in spring training and our general manager sits down with me, Jim Bowden, and I'm in a minor league spring training game. It's like mid-March. And he says, hey, we want you to do the pre and post game show for the Nationals on Masson. And I'm like, well, that's awesome. That would be something I'd really look into after I'm done playing. They're like, no, we want you to do it this year. And I was like, I came here to play baseball, not do, like, I'm not done. But that was tough, right? Because the general manager of the team is saying, well, you're done in my mind. And so I guess I'm pretty good at it, and people, like hiring me to do it. And I really like doing it. And I like doing sports talk radio, Billy, because I get to talk about all the sports. And I do love basketball. I love football. I'm not much into hockey. I'm very casual hockey fan. So I stay out of those conversations. My dad told me one time, I guess he was told by Gene Mauch, who was his manager in Minnesota in 79 and 80, he says, it's too bad he doesn't know what he doesn't know. And I know that I don't know hockey. So I'm not going to try to pretend that I can talk hockey.
Mike, you've been so gracious with your time. I have two final questions for you. My first is going back to the Bonds home run. Does it bother you at all that I think, especially when hardcore baseball fans, they might hear your name, they think, oh, that's the guy that gave up the home run to Barry Bonds. Does that part of it bother you at all? I mean, I think about it, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in a lot of ways, you've been kind of able to maintain that privacy in life that maybe some other, big leaguers who played at and people very well known might not be able to know. I mean, does that bother you at all? I mean, how do you kind of reflect on that whole part of your career?
Well, Billy, that's why I decided not to be a great Major League Baseball player, to keep my privacy, make sure I didn't have enough money, that I didn't have to work, stuff like that. But I would say it doesn't really bug me. Obviously I get asked about it a lot, which is great. It's a baseball conversation and we get to talk about it. And hopefully it leads to other fun baseball conversations, whether it's about the current game, whether we get to then start talking about, do you think Juan Soto could be a guy who could get to, Barry Bonds type numbers and stuff like that. So it's a starting off point to talk about baseball. The one thing, and I'll bring it up here, even though you didn't, is I do get frustrated if people ask me the question, did you give it up intentionally? And that does happen sometimes in interviews or conversations. And I play it off, just being honest with you, Billy, I play it off as like, oh, no. But it does inside of me irk me that somebody thinks that I would have intentionally tried to lose or intentionally tried to give up a home run. And what I say is, and it's a sarcastic joke, but it's also the truth, I gave up, unfortunately, a lot of home runs to a lot of players worse than Barry Bonds. So that Barry hit one off of me that day is no indication that I intentionally did it. If you saw some of the guys who did hit home runs off of me that you wouldn't believe hit home runs.
And Mike, my final question for you is, as you reflect on your career, both playing and in the media, are you pretty content with how it's played out? I mean, you got to play in the highest professional league possible there is for baseball, the major leagues. You've had a successful career on sports talk radio since then. As you reflect on your career, are you pretty happy with how everything's played out? Is there something you wish you would like to do, or all being said, pretty happy with where you're at right now?
Well, that's a good question, Billy. And I wasn't happy at all when it ended. In fact, eventually I went to therapy for it, because I think when you make it to the major leagues, most of the guys who make it to the major leagues were their best player in high school, their best player in their area, an all conference guy or all district or MVPs of certain things. So to get done playing baseball at 30 years old when I wasn't ready to be done and just nobody really wanted me anymore, and to only play in 5 different seasons in the major leagues, only win 10 games, I struggled with that a lot. I just felt like I was going to be way better. And I get that my stuff wasn't as good as other people's stuff. I just felt like, these were all feelings, and some is it's my truth, but that, hey, I deserved a better opportunity, or if I would have gotten the opportunity of my friend here or that guy over there in that organization, or if I wouldn't have been traded from the Indians to the Mets, what would have happened? So there was a lot of things that just hurt inside that I was angry about how my career went. Yet I still love the game of baseball, but it took me a while to be at peace with what happened. But now, yes, I am happy. I wish I would have been better. I wish I would have played 10 years in the major leagues, won 100 plus games, been on championship teams. There's a lot of things that I wish I would have accomplished and been better at the major leagues. But I understand that I did everything possible at the time without cheating to try to make the major leagues and stay in the major leagues. And whether, it was fair or unfair, I'm now okay and out at peace with it. I love the game of baseball. I love that I got to play at the major leagues. And sometimes, Billy, I watch how good major leaguers are now and being out of the game for 10 plus years and go, I can't believe I was able to compete against people this good at baseball.
Mike, this has been such a pleasure getting to talk to you about your career, about all the stories you have to share. One of the nicest guys out there. Really appreciate your time today. It's been such a pleasure talking to you.
Well, thanks a lot, Billy, man. Thanks for having me, and this was fun.
Mike Bacsik, former big league pitcher, current sports talk radio host, nice enough to join me today on the latest edition of The Pulse with BP. Thanks so much to everybody for joining us. I'm your host, Billy Parvatam. We'll see you next time.